portables. What needs of you?
Supporting everyone from established brands to entrepreneurs just starting their journey. You can create your professional storefront effortlessly with Shopify's extensive library of customizable templates designed to reflect your brand's unique identity. Boost your productivity with Shopify's AI-powered tools that craft compelling products, descriptions, engaging headlines, and even enhance your product's photography, all with just a few clicks. Plus, you can market your business like a pro without hiring a team. Easily develop and launch targeted email campaigns and social media content that reaches customers wherever they spend their time, online or offline. If that's not enough, Shopify offers expert guidance on every aspect of commerce, from inventory management to international shipping logistics to seamless return process. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period and start selling today at shopify.com/JBP. Go to shopify.com/JBP. Again, that's shopify.com/JBP.
Pride, is the cardinal sin, you might say. It's pride that is the fundamental characteristic of Lucifer, the usurping spirit. You can think of the Luciferian spirit as the individual, or the proclivity of the individual, to elevate themselves to the highest possible position. I'll give you an example. When Eve is tempted by the serpent to eat the apple, or the fruit, It's not described as an apple in the Genesis story, but it has become that by tradition, which is relevant to this story. The serpent, who's camouflaged, by the way, like female aggression, tells Eve that if she eats this particular fruit, which means if she consumes it and incorporates it and takes it into herself, becomes it, you might say, that she'll become like God, knowing good and evil. What does that mean? Establishing the moral order. And so Eve eats the fruit offered to her by the serpent so that she can take the place of God and define the moral order. And that's partly why the serpent in the Genesis story becomes associated, as the mythology develops, with Lucifer, the usurping intellect who attempts to take the place of the divine. That's all associated with the idea of pride. Pride is the vice that says, what I want now, I in the most narrow possible way, or what my whims want now should be superordinate to all other concerns. The pride that the evil queen takes in her beauty is the taking to herself of a talent that was given to her by providence, let's say, by taking that to herself as a virtue that confers special privileges and benefits on her as an isolated individual. What would the alternative be? She could be extraordinarily grateful for her beauty and self-effacing and kind and self-sacrificing. That would make her the good queen rather than the evil queen. She also had a mirror, and every morning she stepped in front of it and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" The mirror would answer, "You, my queen, are the fairest of all." Okay, well, what's a mirror? A mirror is a place for self-reflection, but it's also a place of intense self-consciousness, right? When you look in a mirror and you recognize yourself in the mirror, you are self-conscious. In fact, self-recognition in the mirror is a marker used by biologists to determine the presence or absence of self-consciousness in animals. So to look in a mirror is to become self-conscious. Okay, so what's the problem with that? Well, psychologists have known for decades that the experience of self-consciousness is so tightly associated with negative emotion that they're statistically indistinguishable. So when the theorists who created the Big Five personality map, five-dimensional personality map, extroversion, neuroticism, conscientiousness, agreeableness, and openness, which is a creativity dimension, when they first laid out that map, they noticed that their statistical inquiries indicated that being self-conscious was so tightly associated with trait neuroticism, which is the proclivity for anxiety. Someone had been in their house. The first dwarf said, "Who's been sitting in my chair?" "Who's eaten off my plate?" said the second. "Who's eaten some of my bread?" said the third. "My vegetables," said the fourth. "Who's been using my little fork?" said the fifth. "Who's been cutting with my little knife?" said the sixth. "Who's had something to drink from my little cup?" said the seventh. Then the first dwarf looked around and said, "Who's been sleeping in my bed?" The second cried out, "Someone's been sleeping in my bed." And he was followed by each of them, until the seventh dwarf looked at his bed and saw little Snow White lying there asleep. The others came running over to him, and they were so astounded that they screamed and fetched their 7 little candles to observe little Snow White. "Oh, my lord," they explained, "how beautiful she is. They took great delight in her." Okay, well, that's actually an indication that these are pretty decent little dwarfs, too, because if they were as pathological as the little queen, and they came across a attractive juvenile female, God only knows what hell could break loose, as we've seen repeatedly in places like the UK, for example. So the dwarves are protective of Snow White and her beauty and serve a proper paternal and partnership function. They took great delight in her but didn't wake her up. They let her sleep in the bed. That's very generous of them. They're very hospitable, which also indicates their essential morality. Well, the seventh dwarf spent an hour in each one of his companions' bed until the night had passed. When she awoke, they asked her who she was and how she had managed to come to their cottage. Then she told them how her mother had wanted to have her killed, how the huntsman had spared her life, and how she had run all day until she had eventually arrived at the cottage. Then the dwarfs took pity on her and said, "If you'll keep house for us, cook, sew, make the beds, wash and knit, and if you'll keep everything neat and orderly, you can stay with us, and we'll provide you with everything you need. When we come home in the evening, dinner must be ready. During the day, we're in the mines and dig for gold. You'll be alone. We'll have to watch out for the queen and not let anyone enter the cottage." Okay, so what's the deal here? Well, Snow White has run from the destructive force of her evil mother and the most pathological element of nature and plunged deep into the unknown, where she found the dwarfs who are emblematic of the stable patriarchy. The stable, ordinary, productive patriarchy. Now, the deal for her is that she has to serve the dwarfs and they'll protect her from the evil queen. So that's a pretty good deal, given that the evil queen wants to eat her lungs and her liver, so is posing a mortal threat. And it's indicative of the notion that prior to finding a prince, you might say, and finding permanent protection from the evil queen in the form of a stable, long-term, desirable partnership, a marriage, the young woman threatened by the evil queen, which is the eternal archetypal situation of isolated young women, has to make a pact to serve ordinary masculinity, right? To partner with ordinary masculinity, to have respect for it, to understand its productive function, and to know that it's ordinary masculinity, you might say, that stops female pathology from making itself manifest as the ultimately destructive force it can all too easily become. Right, so what's the moral of the story as we proceed? If you want to find a prince and escape from the evil queen, you have to serve the dwarfs with some degree of gratitude and conscientious dedication. Right, with some real emphasis on gratitude. And why? Well, better the dwarves than the evil queen, right? Which is exactly the opposite of the feminist narrative, which is that there are only power-mad, pathological men, and all that's feminine is benevolent. It's like, yeah, right. God. In the meantime, the queen believed that she was once again the most beautiful woman in the land, and stepped before her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is fairest of all?" The mirror answered, "You, my queen, have a beauty quite rare, but beyond the 7 mountains, this I must tell. Little Snow White is living quite well. Indeed, she
keeps authoritarian dictators into power. If you have chaos, you're going to, Adolf Hitler or, someone can just come to power, strongman. In Brazil, I think on the flag it says ordem e progresso, order and progress. So chaos tends to push many people to the right, or at least towards an authoritarian. And so that's the first piece. Now let me add on to that, the analysis I gave in The Righteous Mind, because we know that politics is highly heritable, whether you are on the left or the right, if you have an identical twin separated at birth, you're probably going to have similar politics. Because it's a temperament thing about openness to experience and conscientious, all sorts of things. So if you have a society in which some people, they just really want to change, they question everything, why do we do it this way, why don't we do it differently? Well, it's good to have some people who do that. But then you also have some people who say, no, the old ways are tried and true, let's not go changing them until we, unless we really need to. And so this is Edmund Burke. This is the conservative impulse. So when I started The Righteous Mind, I was a progressive. I wanted to help the Democrats stop losing, to George W. Bush, and I was very much on the left. But by the time I finished the book, I realized, wow, to have a good society is so difficult, and you got to get the settings just right. And if you have some people pushing for change and some people resisting, you get this dynamic that can be incredibly productive. That's when I really became a centrist. as a social scientist, I was increasingly bothered that most social scientists are on the, not just the, almost all are on the left, other than some economists. They're almost all on the left, but many of them act as though they are the support team for the Democratic Party. And I used to feel like that too. And I think that is unprofessional. We've got to stop. So I became a principled centrist. By principled, what I mean is, it's not like I'm a centrist on every issue because the answer is in the middle. No, I'm a centrist because of human imperfections, because of confirmation bias. We need people to disconfirm. We need to interact with people to disconfirm our bias. In fact, can I bring on the John Stuart Mill book? Where is that?
Of course you can.
Let's see. Yeah, let's bring it on. Okay. So John Stuart Mill's On Liberty is one of the greatest works of Western philosophy, the greatest thing ever written about the importance of free speech, and in particular, what Mill does is he points out that when we shut people down, we don't just hurt them, we hurt ourselves. We make us all stupider. The most famous line in here, I know it by heart. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. And it just, so I took at Heterodox Academy, we took chapter 2 of On Liberty. It's 15,000 words with a lot of obscure historical examples, and with Richard Reeves, this great British intellectual policy person, now American, we've got him. But so he and I condensed it down to half that, to 7,000 words. And this amazing artist, Dave Cicerelli, came to me and said, "Can I help you? I love what you do at Heterodox Academy." And I said, "Yeah, read this chapter and then illustrate the metaphor." So you get these amazing, illustrations of people locked into their head, prison of thought. And
what John's saying, Gen Z, is they've even put in pictures for you.
Yes.
Go read it.
Yes,
there's a coloring in bit as well.
Beautiful illustrations. So I'm an intuitionist. That is, I believe that we need to feel something and then also get the reasons, and then we know it.
Yeah.
So that was our idea with this book. And Dave is so brilliant that then he checked in with me again last year and said, "Hey, John, how you doing?" I said, "Dave, the publisher has come up with a terrible cover for my book. I don't like it. Can you do better?" And he did this.
Wow.
It's a girl kind of drowning in a ball pit of emojis and smiles. And he and I did this guerrilla art campaign. Dave created these 12-foot tall milk cartons that say on them, "Missing Childhood."
Wow.
So anyway, there you go. Yeah. So here, work by Dave Cicerelli.
Awesome. We've actually done our hour, and I want to spend another 40 minutes or so on locals, talking about some more controversial stuff, more difficult stuff, etc. So we're going to go and do that in a second. We're going to ask you some questions our supporters have submitted. Before we do that, we always end the main part of the interview with the same question, which is, what's the one thing we're not talking about as a society that you think we should be?
Oh, let's see. And there's so much. I mean, there's so much that we don't talk about because we're afraid of the social consequences. So, exploring just a pure sociological exploration of the effects of diversity, I think would be extremely important to do. And sociology should be doing that. But sociology is an incredibly ideological field. There are not a lot of sociologists.
Well, it's a sacred subject, really, isn't it?
Exactly.
Strength is a thing that you're not supposed to investigate because you might find that it's not, and then what are you going to do with that?
That's right, because it's an Orwellian sort of phrase. And so a whole another line of writing that I have is on fiduciary duty and professional responsibility. I think as professors, as academics, we have two fiduciary duty. Fiduciary duty is way above normal legal obligations. It's pure, perfect. You must never betray it. You must never act in a way that helps you but harms the person that you are fiduciary for. I think as professors, we have two fiduciary duties. One is to our students' education, not to their welfare, to their education. We must never act in a way that puts our politics ahead of their education, and we do it all the time. So that, I think, is a horrible violation of fiduciary duty. That's one reason why America, especially, not just on the right, but Americans in the center, have lost a lot of trust in higher ed in this country. But the main fiduciary we have as scholars is to the truth. We must never, ever say something that is not true because somebody paid us money to do it. Now, that almost never happens. Money is not the big threat in the academic world. We must never, ever say something that is not true because our politics demands it. And that's everyday life in the social sciences and the humanities. So the corruption of academic research is not from money. I mean, in medical areas it is, but for the most part, it's not from money. It's from the fact that we have almost no viewpoint diversity, and therefore certain things become sacred, not the truth. That's why I co-founded Heterodox Academy with other social scientists and with a legal scholar, Nick Rosencrantz, because we were not, it wasn't about a left-right thing, it was about we love universities, we want them to work, they're not working. And they're, so anyway, I think universities have made their bed by allowing this stuff to happen, and now they're lying in it and unable to have a clear voice on protests and intimidation.
Well, we're going to talk about protests on campus, we're going to talk about diversity, we're going to talk about what you can do with your kids in terms of solving the problems that we've talked about so far, and a lot more, including your questions on local, so head on over there now.